So last few classes, we've been working on adding integers with different signs. And when we say different signs, we mean you have one positive and one negative. Since those two are opposites, they're trying to take away from each other and cancel. So we started by looking at these integer chips and actually seeing that cancelization happen. We learned that one negative and one positive combine to create this zero pair that cancels each other out and takes away. So we can keep going creating those zero pairs until we see the only thing that we have left. So something like negative 5 plus 3 would leave us with an answer of negative 2. Then we learned that we could get that answer from actual subtraction. So subtracting the bigger base minus the smaller base, and then keeping the sign of whatever we have more of. So down here at the bottom, we see another example with integer chips. So if you like those, you could see that visualization and the cancellation happen. Or using this new process, you could do 6 minus 2, which would give us 4, and then check the sign of your final answer. So here we have more positives, which means my answer would stay positive. Now in these next two, I don't have chips. You could always draw yourself a visual if that helps, or you can use our new process. So here, 10 plus negative 30, I would actually want to do 30 minus 10. So I know that the number is going to be 20, and then I need to check my sign. I see I have more negatives here. Those would outweigh the positives, which would give me a final answer of negative 20. With negative 8 plus 2, I'd want to subtract 8 minus 2 to give me 6. And then same thing, I have more negatives, so I would need to make my answer negative 6. So today what we're going to look at is what if instead of different signs, they were actually the same sign? And the good news is this is what you've been doing up until 7th grade every time you've been adding numbers. You've been adding two positives. So I don't think any of you would need to see 3 plus 5 to know the answer is 8. But what I do want to point out is the absence of opposites. There are no opposites that are trying to cancel or take away from each other. So instead, what's happening when you have the same sign is they are combining together. So nothing's canceling, nothing's getting taken out. Instead, you're adding up the total number, that combination of your two. So adding two negatives is very similar to adding two positives. Since there's nothing to cancel with, instead they're combining and becoming more negative. So I can see with my chips, I have negative 6 plus negative 3 modeled here in front of us. And there's nothing to cancel. So instead, I'm going to count up how many total negatives I have. They're combining, and that would leave me with 9 negative chips. So the answer to negative 6 plus negative 3 would be negative 9. Same thing with this next one. I have negative 2 plus negative 10. No positives there to cancel or take away. So instead, I'm counting them all up. They're combining, and I would get an answer of negative 12. Now, hopefully what you can see is that's very similar to just doing regular positive 6 plus 3 or positive 2 plus 10. The difference is I'm making sure that my answer is still negative in the end. So the process that's happening when you're adding integers with the same sign, and that would either be two positives or two negatives, is that you're really adding those base numbers as if they're positive. So even if they're negative, I'm going to add them together as if they're positive because they're combining. And then what you're going to do at the end is just make sure you have the right sign. So since they're the same sign, you're just going to keep the original sign you started with, meaning if you're adding two negatives, your answer is going to stay negative. So let's do some examples. Negative 6 plus negative 11, I would want to add up those two numbers. That gets me 17, and I just need to make sure I keep it negative in the end. Similar process with negative 7 plus negative 3. They're the same sign, both negatives. So I know I'm going to add those together and make my answer negative. So the tricky part comes when we start mixing these up and you have both types of problems. The biggest thing to remember is that when they're different signs, they're trying to cancel. So a positive takes away from a negative, and that happens whenever you have each sign. So something like 6 plus negative 2 would cancel out and leave me with positive 4. Something like negative 7 plus 4 would cancel out those negatives and positives and would leave me here with a negative 3. If they're the same signs, there's nothing there to cancel or take away. So instead, these are combining all together and adding up. So an example like negative 5 plus negative 4 would leave me with negative 9. So when we start to practice these addition problems, the first thing to look for is if the two numbers are the same or if they're different signs. That's going to tell you how to solve the problem. So if I see two numbers that are different, a positive and a negative, I have to remember their opposites and trying to cancel. So what's happening is they're subtracting away from each other, and I keep the sign of whatever I have the most of. If they're the same signs, two positives or two negatives, those are trying to combine, and I'm going to add them together. And since they're the same sign, I keep whatever the original is. So let's look at some examples where we don't have the visuals. As a reminder, if those help, you can always draw yourself a quick picture. Or we can think back to that flow chart to help us remember what to do with the numbers. First thing to look for is the sign of the numbers that you're working with. So for something like negative 5 plus negative 7, I first need to ask myself, are they the same signs or are they different? And here I see that they're the same because they're both negative. So since they're the same, that tells me they're combining together, so I would add those base numbers. 5 plus 7 would give me 12, and then I check my final sign. Since they're both negative, my answer would stay negative and give me negative 12. For the next one, I have negative 3 plus 18. This time I see I have one negative and one positive, so they're different and therefore trying to cancel. Remember that canceling or taking away goes back to subtraction. So I'm going to subtract my bigger number minus the smaller number, and then I need to see what sign I have more of. Here, my positives outweigh the negatives, and my answer would be positive 15. Next one, you might want to pause the video now to try these on your own. But I have 9 plus negative 4, one positive, one negative. They're different, they're canceling, so I would subtract. 9 minus 4 gives me 5. Check which one I have more of, and that would be positives. Negative 3 plus negative 14, two negatives. They're the same sign, therefore no canceling, they're combining, and I would add them together. That gets me 17, but I need to keep my original signs here, so the final answer would be negative 17.